Some sound like air brakes when they've been released, and others sound like freight trains rushing towards a deadline. But everybody sneezes. You might not have thought you would come to church today and hear about sneezing, but I hope by the time we're finished today you'll understand what sneezing has to do with you and God's work in your life. Now, I said that everybody sneezes. What about you? Do you have a dainty sneeze, or do you have a sneeze that can be heard 7 doors down? When I was in school, there was a boy who was in my class. When he sneezed, the elementary could hear it. All the way from the high school, the elementary school could hear it. And I'm not even making that up. I'm not exaggerating. When he would sneeze, people would kind of come up. It was a Christian school, so people would kind of come up out of their chairs a little bit because they thought the trumpet was blowing and they were trying to get a little bit ahead. Everybody sneezes a little different, but the reality is that everybody sneezes. Do you ever try to hold in a sneeze, or are you the type that just always lets it out? How ridiculous it is, the only thing that maybe makes us look more ridiculous than sneezing is trying to hold it in. The faces that people make when they're trying, especially whether it's in public or even in private, when they're trying to hold a sneeze in, the faces are hilarious. According to some ancient myths, they believed that sneezing was actually your soul leaving your body. So when your soul left your body, there was a very real danger that the devil would grab your soul before it could get back into the body. So there was a custom that came about where when someone sneezed, they would follow it up with "bless you." That was a way to try to keep the devil from getting your soul. There's only really one place in Scripture where sneezing is mentioned. Now, there are 2 passages, one in Job, and in Job where the word sneezing is used, I think it would actually be better translated as snorting. So really, I think there's only one passage in the Scripture where the word sneeze is actually mentioned. That's in 2 Kings chapter 4. Now, you remember we were in this chapter together several weeks ago, and I kind of want to set up the scene and remind you what we saw, what we learned from it before we dive into the text today. There was a Shunammite woman who realized that Elisha was a man of God, and because of that realization, she built a little chamber with her husband's permission. She built a little chamber on the wall of her house. It was a place that every time Elisha passed through as he was doing his work, as he was journeying in his work for God, it was a place Elisha could stop and rest. One day Elisha came to that little private quarters she had made for him, and he laid down in the bed there, and he started to think about how kind that she and her husband had been to he and his servant Gehazi. He told Gehazi to call her to him because he wanted to give her a reward. She came when she was called, and Elisha said, what can I do for you? You've shown me all this kindness. What can I do for you? Should I mention your name to the king? Should I tell the captain of the army about you? And basically her answer was, I'm just a small town girl. I'm satisfied with my life here. I don't need notoriety. I don't need fame. Please don't do any of that. Don't make a fuss over me. After she left, Elisha hadn't yet given up on what he could do for her. And he asked Gehazi, what do you think? How can we show her kindness for the kindness that she's shown to us? Well, Gehazi said, well, her husband is an old man, and they don't have a son. When he said that, immediately Elisha knew that was it. That was the thing that they could do for her. Now, of course, Elisha couldn't miraculously provide her with a son, but he knew a God that could. She had taken care of him. She'd taken care of God's man. Now God was going to take care of her. Elisha sent Gehazi to call her back to the room again. She came and she stood in the door of the room, kind of like a servant just waiting for an order. But instead of receiving an order, she was about to receive a gift. Elisha looked at her and said, because of all of your kindness that you've shown to us, in a year from now, you're going to hold a son. You're going to have a son of your own. She responded, she kind of thought it was a joke, and she basically said, don't mock me. Don't toy with me. But Elisha says, no, you're going to have a son. In a year's time, this woman embraced a son of her very own, a son of her husband. It was a couple years later, the little boy went out to the field where his father and the reapers were reaping the harvest. While he was out there, we don't know exactly why, but while he was out there, he developed a very severe, a terrible headache. In fact, it was so severe the little boy began to cry out about how terrible his head was hurting. Well, Dad sent the little boy with a servant back to his mother, and the servant took him back to the Shunammite woman back in the village, back in the compound. And she took him, and like mothers do, she set him on her lap, and she sat there, she rocked at him, she comforted him, but at noon he died. I mean, she'd been given this promise, she had been given this miraculous child, and here she is. By 12 o'clock that day, this little boy, this little promise was dead. What we saw that was so interesting about this Shunammite woman was the way that immediately she took the little boy, she put him in this private providence chamber, and rather than panicking or panicking anyone else, she ran straight to the prophet. Her husband said, why are you going to the prophet today? I mean, it's not a new moon, it's not a Sabbath, it's not a sacrifice time. And she didn't really even answer by saying the boy's dead. She just said, everything's okay, it's well. As she rode to the prophet, as he saw her coming, he says, well, look, there is the Shunammite woman coming towards us. And he sent Gehazi to ask her if everything was okay. Gehazi got to her and he said, are you okay? Is your husband okay? Is the boy okay? And her answer was, it is well. Now, for a woman who has just lost her only son, a woman whose husband is old, a woman who will in a short time be destitute at the loss of her husband, now she's lost her son, the only other male that could provide for her, that could speak for her in the community. This is a woman whose life has just been absolutely destroyed, absolutely wrecked. And yet when Gehazi asked her, is everything okay? She said, everything's fine. It's well. We learned from her that because we have a connection, believers can say, it is well, even when it seems like it's not. Because we have a connection to someone greater and stronger than us, we can say, it is well in our life, even when it seems like everything's out of control. That's where we stopped our reading last time. Let's pick up our reading in verse number 27 of 2 Kings chapter 4. Now when she came to the man of God at the hill, she caught him by the feet. Now, this was very inappropriate at this time for a woman to touch a man who she wasn't married to, but even a married couple wouldn't have touched each other in public. But here she comes up to Elisha and she grabs him by his feet. The scripture says in verse 27 that Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God, Elisha, said, let her alone, for her soul is in deep distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Verse 28, so she said, did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Then Elisha said to Gehazi, get yourself ready and take my staff in your hand and be on your way. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. In other words, Gehazi, this is so important. If you meet anyone on the way, don't even stop to talk to him. If you meet anyone, do not greet him. If anyone greets you, do not answer him, but lay my staff on the face of the child. Verse 30, the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So he arose and followed her. Now Gehazi went on ahead of them and laid the staff on the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Therefore he went back to meet him and told him, saying, the child's not awakened. Gehazi did exactly what Elijah said. He took Elisha's staff and he laid it on the little boy's face, but nothing happened. As Elisha and this Shunammite woman now have left Carmel and they're on their way to Shunem, Gehazi meets them somewhere on the way back and said he's dead. Verse 32. Elisha and the woman arrive at the house. Verse 32, when Elisha came into the house, there was the child lying dead on his bed. He went in, therefore, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Now, we're going to look at this more on Wednesday night, how Elisha did not trust in himself. Elisha's first response was to seek the hand and the power of God. Elisha shut the door, and Elisha prayed to the Lord, and he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and stretched himself out on the child, and the flesh of the child became warm. He returned and walked back and forth in the house again, went up and stretched himself out on him. Then the child sneezed 7 times. The child opened his eyes, and he called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite woman. So he called her, and when she came in to him, he said, "Pick up your son." So she went in, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she picked up her son and went out. Wednesday night, we're going to look at the miraculous side of this text. But today, I want to, as we come to the end, this will be the last message in our Forget-Me-Not series for this year, as we look at this little boy. This little character who's not really well known in Scripture. He only appears just in this one brief instance. We're not given his name. We're not even given his age. What can we learn from this little boy, this little dead boy from the Scripture? I think this text paints, and what I want to focus on this morning is the beautiful picture that this text paints of God's Word, of God's work in both our salvation and our sanctification. You see, it's God who revives us and restores us. It's God who saves us and sanctifies us. In this text, I want to look at Elisha as God's representative. Now, Elisha was God's representative in more than one way. He was certainly a conduit of God's power. Everything that's done here is not done from any power that Elisha has in himself. It's done from the power of God running through Elisha being used. So certainly he is a conduit of God's power. But more than that, I think this interaction with the little boy illustrates the way that the Spirit interacts with us. Here I want to show you how Elisha's working with this boy represents the working of God in us, both to bring us to salvation and to push us forward in sanctification. Let me show you what I mean. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 4 says, "But for him who is joined to all the living, there is hope." Simplified, all it's saying is anyone that is alive has hope. But for him who is joined to the living, there is hope. For a living dog is better than a dead lion. In other words, although a dog is not as grand, a dog is not as strong. In fact, we think of dogs as pets. Dogs in ancient times were often not pets. They were roaming packs of beasts that ate the trash, that attacked children. A dog at that time was not as noble as we may consider a dog now. Yet Solomon the wise man said, there's more hope for a living dog than there is for a dead lion. What I want you to see is that this boy was dead. And being dead, he was therefore hopeless. He could not help himself, much less could he save himself. Had his mother not sought outside help, had Elisha not entered the picture, this boy would have remained dead. We would not be looking at his little life and his little resurrection this morning had not Elisha intervened. It was only because Elisha intervened that this boy was revived. What I want you to see this morning is that every one of us either are or were like this little boy. Ephesians Chapter 2 and verse 1 tells us that Christ, He has made us alive who were dead in trespasses and sins. You see, sin brings that every individual, everyone has sinned, everyone has fallen short of the glory of God. Sin brings immediate spiritual and eventual physical death. Though it took hundreds of years for their bodies to catch up to their souls, when Adam and Eve ate the fruit in the garden, their souls were immediately poisoned. Though physically they lived for hundreds of more years, in that moment that they bit into the fruit, their soul, the inner man, fell over dead. And every child born into their family since that moment has been born spiritually stillborn. Their disobedience in the garden resulted in the whole family's spiritual death. The poison of disobedience has been passed down through the bloodline of humanity from generation to generation. Spiritually speaking, we are not born alive and slowly dying. Physically, that may be true. We're born alive yet dying. But physically, we are born dead. Every single human being who ever lived was born dead, except for Adam and Eve. Without outside intervention, we are hopeless, we are helpless, we are toe-tagged corpses. Dead men can't help themselves. No corpse has ever revived itself. Dead men don't. Yea, dead men can't shock their own heart back into rhythm. Lifeless lips can't give themselves mouth to mouth. A body that doesn't have breath can't breathe into itself. Without outside intervention, dead men do not get back up. Never has a 911 operator ever heard, "Excuse me, can you please send an ambulance? I think I've just died." You see, dead men don't make phone calls. Dead men can't even cry out for help for themselves. For us, it wasn't that we were born alive and then we gradually died. No, every one of us were born dead with no hope of life if left to ourselves. Each of us were like this boy, dead. Every person that's listening to me this morning, and every person who will watch and listen on the internet later, for every person this is true. You either are dead or you were dead. Yet for those of us who have come to Christ, the Scripture says that He has made us alive who are dead in trespasses and sins. It was by the grace of God. It was by God's decision. It was by God's intervention. God chose not to leave us that way. And it wasn't just that God Himself intervened. It was that God sent other people to intervene on our behalf. Notice what happened. This Shunammite mother, when her little boy died, she wasn't content to leave him that way. She went to the prophet. She took hold of the prophet's feet, and she swore that she would not let him go until her little boy was restored. So it's often that same way with us. Rarely does anyone get into heaven without someone else praying them out of hell. But even the prayers of believers are birthed in the hearts of believers by a sovereign God who loves sinners. Even if there's someone praying for you before you became a believer, it's because God gave them that burden. It's because God called them into prayer. Someone else always has to call 911 for a dead man. And you can be confident this morning, if you are a believer, if you're in Christ, it's because someone was praying for you. And if you're not a believer here this morning, if you're not trusting Jesus, I'm going to tell you something. There is someone praying for you. If you've been raised to new life, I wonder who was it that took hold of the feet of God and would not let go until you were resuscitated? Who called 911 for you? Who prayed for you when you did not even have the breath to pray for yourself? Without breath, there is no voice. Without voice, there is no crying out. Who prayed for you when you didn't have the breath to pray for yourself? Who spent their own breath seeking God for you? Who cried out to God, "God, I will not leave your presence until you answer my petition, until you save my son or my daughter, until you redeem my coworker, until you come and intervene in my dead neighbor's life"? Whether you are aware of it or not, someone was praying for you before you ever whispered a prayer for yourself. It may have been a mother, it may have been a friend, and there might even be some sitting here this morning who say, "I don't know anybody that was praying for me." Can I tell you, if there was no one on earth praying for you, there was someone in heaven praying for you. There were two in heaven praying for you. Both the Son and the Spirit were interceding on your behalf that you might be resuscitated. This is not the message this morning, but I've got to ask, if that's true, who are you praying for? If somebody dialed 911 for you, who are you dialing 911 for? Who are you anxious to see come to Christ? In his book, Why Revival Tarries, Leonard Ravenhill says the church has too many organizers and not enough agonizers, and that's so true. We can organize ministry, we can do so many things, we can have programs, we can have outreach, we can share the gospel all we want to, but without prayer, it's all going to be ineffective unless we are taking hold of the feet of God and begging Him to do what we can't. It's going to be completely pointless. Not only was someone petitioning the healer for this little boy before he was raised, the healer sent a servant ahead. Notice Elisha sent Gehazi with his staff and said, "Lay the staff on the little boy's face." Just as Elisha sent Gehazi, so God sent the law, and like Gehazi, the law was unsuccessful at resuscitation. Galatians 3 teaches us that the law of God, God's rule book, if you will, cannot give life. Rather, what the law does, it serves to prove that we're actually dead. The law of God cannot and it does not save. Rather, what the law does is it shows us our need for a Savior. Gehazi's presence did not, it could not resurrect the boy. What Gehazi did was confirm that he was dead. What the law does, it proves that we are dead and unable to measure up to the standards of God. See, the reality is we think, well, I can at least do this, this, and this to try to measure up to God's standards. I can try to be good and I can try to do all these things. No, what the law says is you're dead and you can't do anything. All of your righteousness is filthy rags. All of your goodness is badness when compared to God and His standard and His law. The law proves to us that we're dead, and as dead men, we cannot do anything to save ourselves. Our inability to keep God's rules shows us that we are dead, and dead men, no matter how well-intentioned they are, cannot do what is required of them. The law proves our condition to us. We are toe-tag dead men. We were stillborn. See, the law cannot save us, but what it does is it prepares the way for one who can. Elisha's interaction with this boy is a beautiful illustration of God's interaction with us. Notice, Elisha approached this little Shunammite boy when this little Shunammite boy could not even think about approaching Elisha. Elisha made the journey to Shunem fully aware that this boy could never find his way to Carmel. It wasn't that this boy didn't know north from south or east from west. It's not that he couldn't read a map to get to Carmel. It's that he was dead and he couldn't even get up off the bed. Just as Elisha went to Shunem when this boy could not ever find his way to Carmel, so God came to us. So God continues to come to us when we cannot, not just we cannot go to Him, but we do not even have the brain waves to think about going to Him. Consider this, it's been said, dead men tell no tales. Can I say further, dead men hear no tales? You can't stand, if we had a coffin here this morning with a dead man in it, you could stand by that coffin and you could read a medical journal about resuscitation until you are out of breath, and I guarantee you it will not affect the dead man one iota. Even good news means nothing to dead men because, as Gehazi said about the boy, they can't hear. Even in preaching the gospel to a dead man, it is completely ineffective unless the Spirit of God intervenes. Even good news means nothing to a dead man because they don't have ears to hear it. Even our ability to hear and receive the gospel is an act of God's regenerating work in us. One may say, well, look, I heard the gospel and I responded in faith. I came to God. But can I say to you that though those things may be true, the fuller truth is that the only reason you came to God was because God opened your ears to hear the gospel. The only reason you cried out to God was because God gave you the breath in your lungs to cry out to Him. Even our ability to hear and to receive the gospel is an act of God's regeneration. If we are completely dead, that means His regeneration precedes our response. Before this little boy opened his eyes, Elisha breathed the breath of life into him. Just like Elisha, God drew near to us when we could not draw near to Him. Let this image be seared in your mind. Elisha warmed this little boy's cold body by stretching his body out over the boy's. And this is exactly what God does for us in the gospel. Like I've already said, we come into this world stillborn. We are cold to the Spirit's touch. We are indifferent to God. But God comes and He makes contact and He begins to melt our coldness with His goodness. He softens our rigor mortis hearts through the power of the gospel. And even before God breathes His divine breath into us, He warms us and He prepares us to receive the gift of life. When I read how Elisha got up and paced the room after his first attempt, I couldn't help but see God walking the halls of heaven, anxious for the redemption, anxious for the resuscitation of dead sinners. Now, don't misunderstand me. There is nothing out of God's control, yet at the same time, I firmly believe that God is anxious for the redemption of His people. He desires all men to be saved. He desires men to come to the knowledge of the truth. I guarantee you this morning, if you're trusting Christ, the glorious truth is that God desired your salvation more than you did. In fact, if you desired Him, it was because He desired you first. Even our desire for God is a result of God's desire for us. More than once through the process, Elisha went back to this boy, and so God does the same for us. He's patient with us because He knows better than we do just how dead we are. He approaches us again and again, warming us with grace, melting us with mercy, until the moment that we are ready to receive the breath of God. What is the breath of God? What is the life of God? It's the Spirit of God. In Scripture, literally, the Greek word for spirit is the word pneuma. It's the word wind or the word breath. When we say that God breathes life into a man, what we mean is that when God comes to a man, when God convicts a man, when a man responds in faith, God literally breathes His Spirit into that man. And just like in Genesis, man became a living soul. Just for the first time when God breathed the breath of life into him, so toe tag dead men. When God presses His lips on us and breathes His Spirit into us, we become spiritually awake, spiritually aware, spiritually alive. Go with me to that little room again. See Elisha pressing his lips on the lips of the child. Can you see the little boy's chest begin to rise as Elisha's breath enters? The preciousness of this moment can't be missed. Just as Elisha breathed into this little Shunammite when he was dead, so God has pressed His divine lips to the blue lips of dead sinners and breathed His Spirit, His life into us. As Ephesians 2:1 said, yes, we were dead in trespasses and sins, but you, if you are trusting in Jesus, He has made alive. If you've come to Christ, it's not because of some great choice you made, it's because of a great choice that God made. We were dead, but He gave us life. Therefore, we glory not in ourselves. We glory not in our ability. We glory not in our asking. We glory in the cross and in Christ and in God alone. The Father reclaimed us, the Son redeemed us, and the Spirit revived us. We glory in God alone because it is He alone who has given us life. When this little boy woke up, his immediate response was, oh, I thank God that I had enough courage and I had enough wisdom to run to Elisha. No, his only response could be, I thank God that Elisha came to me. Receiving new life, though, was not the end of this boy's story. In some ways, I've just spent 25 minutes giving an introduction. Because you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with sneezing that you talked about at the beginning? Receiving new life was not the end of this boy's story. It was really just the new beginning. I want you to, let me show you very quickly as I wrap this up, let me show you what happened when this little boy was revived. The first sign of life for this little boy was, according to the text, before he even opened his eyes, was 7 sneezes. Again, can I remind you of something? Dead people don't sneeze. Dead people can make noise, but dead people can't sneeze. When I worked for hospice, you might not realize this, but air can build up in a body, and even after someone is deceased, when the body is moved, sometimes that air can move, and it can pass across the vocal cords and cause someone to make noise. This girl came to work for hospice and as a CNA, and they were preparing a body after a patient died. And they took and they rolled the body over to change the sheets, to clean the body. And when they rolled the body over, that body all of a sudden, that dead man all of a sudden went, oh. You're talking about running. I don't know if she ever came back to work after that. See, dead men can make noise, but dead men can't sneeze because sneezing is an action required where breath is required. Literally, the lungs fill up with air and expel a huge pressured air out of the body. Dead men can make noise, but dead men don't sneeze. It's important to recognize that sneezing is a function limited to the living. The Shunammite son never sneezed while he was dead, but he could hardly stop once he was brought to life. 7 straight sneezes left his little body before he even opened his eyes. And what does this have to do with us? You think, I really didn't plan on coming to church today and hear my pastor talk about my mucous membranes and me sneezing. And when somebody asks you later what your preacher preached on today, you can tell them he talked about sneezing and see what they think about it. What does this have to do with us? The answer is everything. Notice things that didn't bother this little boy when he was dead suddenly bothered him when he came to life. As I said, God's not only involved in our salvation, He's involved in our sanctification. God's not only the one who comes and resuscitates us. God's the one who restores what death has destroyed. These 7 sneezes were the first sign of life after this little boy came back to life, and so it is with us. When we who are dead are made alive in Christ, we suddenly find that things that didn't bother us when we were dead suddenly do now that we're alive. As long as that little boy was lifeless, he was also careless about his own condition. But once he received new life, he also received new reactions. When we receive the life of Christ, we also receive the Christ of life. The breath of God, as I've already said, is the Spirit of God. When God breathes His breath into us, literally God comes to live inside of us. And you can be certain of this, that the Spirit will not peacefully cohabitate with sin. When the Spirit comes to live within, He immediately sets to work cleaning house. And even now, in every believer, the Spirit is at work in us to get the dangerous out of us. That's why as believers we can't enjoy sin like we used to. Where once it was an infatuation, now it's an irritation. The natural reaction of the new man is to be irritated by the presence of the old man's infatuations. Again, I say dead men never sneeze, but living men can't hold the sneeze in forever. Notice as Elisha breathed the breath of life into this little boy, not only did the boy begin to breathe, but the air began to work in the little boy, and it began to build up to push something else out. Spiritual sneezes are blessings because they are signs of life. Every time we sneeze, we ought to respond to God with a grateful bless you. May I say in closing, I've never seen anyone with a pretty sneeze. Sneezing is undignified. Sometimes sneezing can be downright violent. But sneezing is a sign of life and therefore a source of joy. When God breathes the breath of life into you, suddenly that breath begins to take things that once wouldn't bother you, and suddenly those things become an irritation. See, all a sneeze basically is your body's reaction to an irritation. Something gets into your sinuses, into your nose. Maybe it's something so small that you can't even see it. You don't even know it's there. But your body begins to sense that there's a problem, there's a danger there. And what the body does is it builds up a massive amount of air in the chest cavity, and it expels that amount of air, pushing whatever it is that has invaded your system out. And that's exactly what the Spirit does in our sanctification. The breath that has been breathed into us begins to push out of us the things that are harmful to us. But again, that shouldn't be a thing that we moan over. It shouldn't be a thing that we complain over. Sneezes may not always look pretty. They sometimes might even feel violent. But the reality is sneezes are getting something out of us that's going to hurt us if it don't. And the same breath of God that has been breathed into us is now at work expelling from us those things that irritate the Spirit. Just like we do in the natural sense, so in the spiritual realm, we often, though, the problem is we try to hold in our sneezes, not realizing that getting it out is actually better than holding it in. Do you know that holding in your sneezes can cause severe health problems? Can burst blood vessels in your eyes? There's so many things that can be caused by holding a sneeze in. Sneezes may not be pretty, but they're necessary to keep the body free from invaders. So let me ask you this morning, what is it that's irritating your soul that God wants to eject that you're trying to hold in? I encourage you this morning, if the breath of God has entered you, now the breath of God wants to push some things out of you. My encouragement to you this morning is let the breath of God clean you out. Don't try to hold it in. Let it go. Let it blow. The unnatural irritation is a work of the Spirit trying to get something out of you that's harmful to you. And it might be something so small you can't even see it, but it's an irritation to the spiritual man. It's a harm to the spiritual man. It's an invader that must be squashed, that must be pushed out, lest it cause you great harm. The unnatural irritation is, like I said, a work of the Spirit. If God loved you enough to resurrect you, you can be confident that He loves you enough to reform you as well. It's so funny how people try to hold in a sneeze, and what actually happens in trying to hold in a sneeze, they look dumber than if they'd have just got it out to begin with. Can I say, when the Spirit begins to stir up the dust and sweep the dirt out of your heart, be grateful for the process, even if it's unpleasant in the moment, because only living people sneeze. Dead men don't sneeze because there's no air there. When the Spirit begins to push things out of you that you'd rather keep in, when He begins to clean house, instead of seeing that as something to complain or grumble over, no, rejoice in that, because that means you have the Spirit. And if you have the Spirit, you have Christ. And if you have Christ, you have life. That moment leading up to a good sneeze, it's often uncomfortable. Sometimes it's even painful, but everyone knows there's pleasure, there's relief when the sneeze is over and the irritant is out. Can I ask you this morning, believer, what are you holding in that God wants to get out? Do you know how honestly ridiculous it makes you look trying to hold in a sneeze? Can I say before I close to those here this morning, I said that everybody here either was or is like this boy. If you're here this morning and you never sneeze, of course I'm talking about spiritually. If you never sneeze, the reality is you're probably dead. If sin doesn't bother you, then that's probably an indication that God hasn't breathed into you. And when I say sin bothering you, I don't mean just being bothered that if you got caught. I don't mean just being bothered because you have more confidence. I don't mean any of that. When I say sin bothering you, I mean just the fact that it's even there, really grinding against you and creating trouble in your soul. If sin doesn't bother you, then God has not breathed into you. If the new man is never irritated by sin, the old man is still infatuated with it. If the breath of God is in you, it's going to push some things out of you. If some things are never being pushed out, then that's an evidence that there's something missing in. If your sin doesn't bother you, the Spirit has not yet breathed into you. A sneeze is a proof of life. Life is a proof of the Spirit. Anyone who has the Spirit has Christ. Anyone who has Christ has life. But anyone who does not have Christ does not have life. And if you do not have the Spirit, you do not have Christ. Can I say to you this morning, if sin doesn't bother you, if there is not an obvious measure in the time that you say you've been a Christian, if you cannot obviously see where God has not only resurrected you and give you life, but where God has been restoring you, if you cannot see that and map that out in your life, then friend, there's a problem. If God's never breathed anything out, there's a good chance He's never breathed anything in. Everyone sneezes, maybe a little differently, but everyone sneezes. You know, some people may sneeze several times in a row. Some people may rarely sneeze. But every living person sneezes at some point. But the reality is dead people don't sneeze at all. Everyone here should ask ourselves this morning, we should seriously consider how often, if ever, do I sneeze? If you now find yourself allergic to things you used to love, then my friend, I just want to say bless you, because that means that God is at work in you. God is the one who saves us. God is the one who sanctifies us. I say in closing this morning, as believers, you know, we often do struggle with sin. Sometimes we want to get the sin out, and we want to change, and we don't know how. You know, sneezes are not something that we work up. Sneezes are something that actually happen naturally. And I think what we have to learn as believers is just as much as the Spirit was necessary to give us life, just as much as the Spirit was necessary to resuscitate us, so the Spirit is necessary to reform us. We can't change ourselves. That's a work God has to do. So you say, well, how do I get sin out of my life? Your role is to be surrendered to God, to be surrendered to His Spirit, and to let the Spirit expel from you what's harmful for you. Your role is to submit yourself to God and to let God do the work of sanctification in you. Your role is to be with Him. His role is to be in you and to get out of you what needs to be gotten out of you. Can I say to you this morning, if you've got a sneeze, instead of trying to hold it in, let it out. Let it go. Let it blow. Because sneezes are signs of life. Living people sneeze. Sometimes they sneeze differently. But every living person sneezes. But dead people don't sneeze at all. Sneezes are a reason to rejoice. Will you pray with me?